No, was it good? Oh, I'm Ann Barbara without an E. Kath. Well, shall we begin? I got 2 minutes. There it is. Before we begin, I want to thank Bob Gruber for the article that he had copied and shared. Do you want to say something about it, Bob? Nope. Well, it talks about the context in much more detail, the context around the life of Jesus. So thank you so much for doing it. It was a nice gesture on your part. Well, here we are at the end of our journey, only getting ready to begin another. I'd like to share with you for our opening prayer. Oh, the other thing I wanted to say is if you have a question, just drop your mask down. I'll repeat it, but I think more people will catch it. They're very kind. They're showing this at our Kathy. They're showing it on the 3rd floor at the Mother House, which is great. And I was saying to Rob, some of the sisters that have dementia like it the most. They recognize me, I guess. This is a reading from Isaiah, when we've been using Isaiah as our companion for this last month. And I'm just going to select a part of it. See, my servant shall prosper. He shall be raised high and greatly exalted. Even as many were amazed at him, so marred was his look beyond human semblance, and his appearance beyond that of the sons of men. So shall he startle many nations. Because of him, kings shall stand speechless. For those who have not been told shall see, and those who have not heard shall ponder it. He grew up like a sapling, like a shoot from the parched earth. There was in him no stately bearing to make us look at him, nor appearance that would attract us to him. He was spurned and avoided by people, a man of suffering, accustomed to infirmity, one of those from whom the people hide their faces. Spurned, and we held him in no esteem. So you can sense, as you listen to the prophet Isaiah, how the early church turned back to their books and saw a finger pointing to Jesus. Yes, dear. Well, I think the spurning part refers to the end of his life. But I think he was a normal child too. We have all kinds of stories, and Rob was talking about it today, that Joe Kelly gave a talk about how he'd walk along the little path as a kid and he'd see a dead bird and heal it. I mean, I'm not sure about all those things. I think he was quite normal, and his parents as well. So, we, during this past month, have looked at the who, the what, the where, the when, the why of this coming Passion Week. And the question, I think, for all of us now is, what do we do with the knowledge that we've picked up and shared? What difference does it make? That's why I call this morning's gathering, So Now What? The story of the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ has had an enormous, powerful influence for over 2,000 plus years. We see it in art. Just for a minute, think Da Vinci's Last Supper and all the things that flowed from that. We've seen it in music. Some here have sung Handel's Messiah for years. There you go, and still do. We see it in literature. We see it in drama. We see it as a basis for lectures like this and retreats, and it's all in an attempt to express the importance of the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. Emily Dickinson has poems about the Passion. Our calendars in the West are formed around the event. And this dimension of the Christian message, even in the midst of our divisions, has remained steady. So, Orthodox, Protestant, all of them, Mennonites, Lutherans, Roman Catholic, this coming week, the Passion Week rather, they all hold in common. So for us as Christians, the life, death, resurrection cycle for Jesus Christ is central. And as we woke up this morning and looked around, we're beginning to also see it in nature. Watch what happens as the week gets warmer. We also can see it play out in the communities to which we belong. And I think, therefore I am, I think that may be the answer to the so what question. You and I belong to an enormous number of communities. The biggest one we belong to is the global community. And I want to ask you this question. As you think about, now look, we just landed something on Mars, and it's tooting along and trying to find water and so forth. We've been on the moon, we've discovered planets. We're part of something much larger than ourselves. But when you think about it, what are some of the struggles that our global community is facing? Water is huge. Increased prejudice. Didn't we see that play out just recently? What truth is. Hold on just a second, honey. Yes? All kinds of hunger. The news can be frightening. Epidemics. Some of us are old enough, well, remember our parents' story of the flu epidemic, flu and influenza, AIDS epidemic, polio epidemic, and now COVID. So they're not new to us. Refugees, the number of people on the move, the cultural problems that have been created after wars were boundaries. Remember yesterday, Kathy, we were talking about, is she Austrian or is she something else? Well, who knew? Because the lines kept changing. Remember the Alsace-Lorraine? Are you German or are you French? There's a great story. I heard someone, a Muslim, said he was a Shiite and a Sunni Muslim were at odds. And one said, well, why? They said, well, you killed my family. And the guy said, when did that happen? He said, 1314. Pardon me, love? That's carrying a grudge. The wars that are going on, the struggles that are going on, I believe on some level our global community is going through a passion. Global warming. Some people can't accept it. I'm not a scientist, but if you do a little bit of reading and you watch the polar bears looking for an ice place to live, you gotta say something is happening. So, and the religious struggles. Pope Francis goes to Iraq and he's called a heretic. So the question is, how do we, ordinary citizens, parishioners, how do we bring some kind of a resurrection moment to our global community? Is it at all possible for us? Pardon me? Jesus said, if we have faith, we can move a mountain. What else can we do to bring new life to this global community? Start with ourselves. And for me, that means some kind, it doesn't mean we have to have a PhD in science, but some kind of awareness, which is possible for all of us. First of all, this awareness is something we can do to bring new life. What else can we do? Pardon me, Daryl? Increase volunteerism. There's a group, there are all these groups. There's 2 young men I saw on TV that loved to scuba dive, and they saw the amount of plastic in the ocean. And so they started a business. Now, I'm not saying you have to do that, but they started a business. They collected the plastic. They're manufacturing bracelets. And the money goes to improve the environment. Just to purchase something like that is a small gesture, but it's part of a bigger path. You said something. All around us, that's right. I think avoiding denial is a huge resurrection moment for us. To not fall prey to the fact that this is just a passing piece of information. We know climate change. Where do you think the Finger Lakes came from? They're beautiful, but that was a painful moment for primitive life. So I think, and also the most profound thing you and I can do to bring resurrection to our global community is a recognition that we're all connected. We are all, no matter our sex orientation, our culture, our nationality, our race, we are all made in God's image. If we proceed with that fundamental understanding, we have the capacity in our small way to bring some resurrection to the passion our globe is going through. And yes, Sue. Yeah. One of the things we haven't talked about is prayer. And that's another thing we have the capacity to do. Even thanking God for the beauty that we have is a form of prayer. I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a bit, but thank you. So there's the community to which we belong. We belong to a global community, a national community, a local community, a family community, and religious community. There are multiple levels. And I believe the passion, life, death, resurrection cycle of Jesus Christ has a message for each one of them. So now we looked at the global. Our national life, which is a little closer to us. What are some of the death experiences you're seeing nationally? Sue? All right. Yep. That's right. So go ahead. All right, so Sue said one of the big problems globally, but nationally, and we see this, is anger. And either our unwillingness or our inability to discuss with people the problems over which we differ. What else are passion moments for our nation? Well, justice issues, homelessness, poverty, health care. What is it like for someone? I mean, when I think about the privilege I have to belong to a religious community, sometimes I go to my Aldi's to get my fresh fruit. And I never give a thought about reaching into the wallet to pay for it. Think about what that would mean. If you had, somebody said the other day, this lady made $1,000 a month and her rent was $500. Well, where do you go with that? Those are passion moments. Racism. Look what happened to the Asian community. Look what is happening, I should say. And the other day, the House of Representatives had a hearing on prejudice against Asians and how that's being felt. And I never realized there were that many Asian folks in the House of Representatives. So this one fella from Texas got up and he said, well, I come from Texas and we know we want justice, and this is how we get it: a strong rope and a good tree. Now, that was a folks thing he was trying to say, but can you imagine how an Asian felt when they heard that? Exactly. So all of this history of racism that is right within the history of our country, we can't deny it. From the Native Americans to the different religions that came, to the slavery issue, we can't deny our nation's original sin is probably racism. How do we bring some kind of new life and resurrection to our nation with all of this? What are we going to do as believing people, one or two in a household? What are we going to do? What could we do? Active participants, above all, voting. But what are we seeing now? Attempts to limit it. To be aware that that is the most precious gift we have as a nation. I remember visiting the memorial in Montgomery, Alabama, that Brian Stevenson and his group reported, the memorial showing the effects of lynching. And in a couple of the places we went, they had a picture of a jail and what a jail was like when the blacks were arrested and put there. And then they showed voting things. So let's say I'm African American and I go in to vote, get the right to vote, but I had to either pay a tax or there was a jar of beans on the counter and I had to guess how many were in it before I could vote. So working on voting, I have a good friend, Judy Wadsworth, and she's very active in the League of Women Voters. That is a resurrection moment when we make voting easier for people. Some of them are trying to stop voting on Sundays, and that's when all the blacks gather, and the buses take them to the polls. Well, if you stop voting on Sunday, you're eliminating a whole bunch of people that don't maybe have cars. What else can we do? Sue. Sue said, and that's perhaps the wisest one, start small. Watch our language. What do our grandchildren and children see us do? What do my grandnieces and nephews see me do and say? Balance our views regarding, no, we're going to fund police. That's crazy not to fund them. But yes, we're going to look at certain controls and training. Have a balanced view. Search for facts. Speak up for the voiceless. All right, then let's take the thing down a little further and talk about our local, state and local issues. What are the passion moments we're going through there? The violence we sometimes see of those young children taking the life of an older man by setting him on fire, that is beyond words. Our governor, this is a passion moment. It is for him, and it is for the accused, and it is for the state. I was driving here this morning, And I was listening to NPR, and they were saying the number of deaths on the road from alcohol and speeding have increased during the pandemic. That's a passion moment. That's a suffering moment for families. Our city mayor has been indicted for not telling the truth on an election matter. That's tough for her, but it's tough for the citizens of the city. We have one of the highest child poverty rates in the country. So there are these passion moments that our local communities are facing. And what about us personally? How does Christ's passion play out in our lives? Yes, dear. Yes. It starts a chain. It's like that pass it on. I've watched at Aldi's when you pay your quarter and you get your basket and out you go. And I've watched people take their basket to someone else and they try to, I don't want your quarter, pass it on. It's the smallest darn thing, but it sets a mood in the life of a person for the day. You can say two things.
What I'm noticing coming in out of Mendon Meadows, Wegmans, whatever grocery store I'm in, it's harder to make eye contact with people because of the mask.
Yes.
It's like they're looking down, they're not looking at you. And I kind of think to myself, darn it, that's a person who needs to hear from me.
Yeah.
Hi, how you doing? Are you having a good day? Whatever. It's just so easy to get away with it now, like we're incognito.
We're incognito with the mask, and it's easy to get away with not looking someone in the eye and saying hello. Each one of us has gone through our own passion narratives just like Jesus. Now, I'm not saying they're equal, of course not. But each one of us has been betrayed at some point in life. Each one of us has gone through deaths that have been unspeakable for us. Some of us have faced, or people we know have faced, broken marriages, and what a suffering that is. Life-threatening events. Some of us have faced serious illnesses, misunderstandings, broken relationships. Some of these passion moments you and I have been through are harder than death experiences. I mean, to lose a spouse after so many years, to lose a child. You and I have been through things that are hard. When I was a younger sister, I lived with 7 people at what is now the Mercy Prayer Center. And I was working at St. Monica's. I don't think I ever told you this story. And it was hard work, and I'd come home at night, and we had a break-in. So we were all putting our chairs, the 7 of us, under their doorknob. I don't know how much that had helped. But anyway, I got in bed that night, and I said, oh, for gosh sakes, Barb, you didn't put the chair there. And then I just said, oh, God, I put myself in your hands, and boom, sleep. Next thing I heard the door open. And there was a powder room off my bedroom. So I said, is that you, Sheila? And the voice said, no. So what went through my 40-year-old mind was, the books say stay still. And of course I got up. And I looked over at the door. The door was open, and I saw an arm. And the man pushed the door open. He said, "Get back on the bed or I'll stab you." It's just amazing what happens to you. So I sat down, and he said, "Get your money." Well, I had just had a birthday, and I think I had $40, and I slid it under my sweaters because we had had a break-in. So I went, I said, "Well, I got to get the money." So I got the 20 and 2 10s, and I reached out, and I felt his hand, and I dropped it. He said, "Come on, come on, come on." Fortunately, Sheila across the hall heard it, knowing there wouldn't be a gentleman in my room at 1:30. We hope. We hope. I'd have to run and confess to Rob. Fortunately, and she yelled, "He's in the house." And he ran, but tried twice again. That has an effect on you. And some of you have been through similar things. Some of you have been through similar things. We can, and what happened, let's show you as a resurrection moment. One of the priests with whom I worked, Ron Stacy, he heard, he called, he came over with a bundle of apples, and he said, "Do you want me to sleep downstairs tonight?" Think of what that meant for the 7 of us upstairs. It was a small gesture that brought new life to all of us. And then getting a dog brought a lot of new life. James Martin, I'm sorry to drop 2 more books on you, but this one is a new one and a goodie. James Martin, Learning to Pray. And of course, he's a Jesuit, and he looks at the Jesuit exercises and so forth. But what he has in this book, I think, well, it's helped me, and I have a sense it will help you see the life, death, resurrection cycles in your daily life. And he recommends that, and you can do it anytime. Sometimes I try to do this little quiz of myself at night, and then I fall asleep. But he said, take 5 minutes, maybe just before you're going to bed, and he said, just do a little review of your day. And he said, I suggest you do 5 little things. The first one is presence. In other words, with whom am I present right now? For the most part, it would be the good Lord, because God's everywhere, the Holy Spirit, whatever. Presence. And then speak a word of gratitude for the day. Then review the day shortly. Then express, gee, I'm sorry I didn't call Kathy Powers and thank her. Or I didn't get back to Rob and thank him for this or that. And then say to God, give me the grace to do better tomorrow. 5 things. Presence, gratitude, review, sorrow, and grace. And they don't all have to be in that order. Basically, what he's saying is, if you do that every day, you will begin to see your life, death, resurrection moments as they play out in ordinary time. That's the so what of all we've been discussing. That's what the Paschal mystery can mean to us. And it helps us not just see everything as death, but it helps us see the new life and the kindness of others. And then we express gratitude for it. And that begins to slowly take hold of us. And we see this life, death, resurrection cycle show itself in our dailiness. That's the so what. There are so many things you and I can do for each other. The presence at a funeral or a card can turn things all the way around. I remember seeing across the aisle you at my sister's funeral, and you at my sister's funeral, and many others that I can't even remember now. What a resurrection moment that is. To open a card from someone who says, I'm thinking about you. I have a little friend, Rita Puglisi. She's gone now, but her daughters pick up where she left off. And every once in a while, Rita must have had a book of every feast day, every holiday, every saint's day in the world. And so every once in a while, on the Feast of St. Barbara, who's been dumped from the calendar anyway, her kids send me a card, and one of them always sends a lottery ticket in it. Well, it's the smallest thing, but it is a resurrection moment. We have the capacity to do that. There was a sister in our community, Brian Ford. And as she aged, she was principal of Mercy High School for a while, and as she aged, she was less mobile. Did you know her, Kathy? No. Sister Brian. Yeah. Well, that's you absolutely correct. And so what her ministry came down to, because she was a teacher and a principal and so forth, let's say she heard that I was doing this lecture series. And when it's over, in the evening, there would be a call, and she'd say, I heard you did a good job today. Keep it up. That's all she said. But do you know what a difference it made? And that's no expense, just a touch of effort. An advocate for someone. Yeah, I'll take you to the doctor when I can here. And you know how hard it is to go to the doctor alone and not hear everything correctly? Most of it, if you're like me, I go away thinking it's a death sentence. And I have a friend that says, get real here. Sometimes I'll call Kathy Powers and say, what do you think? She'll say, get real. It's not a death sentence here. To drive someone, to call someone, to visit someone. I believe we are being asked to do what we can to recognize not only our life, death, resurrection moments, but to try to understand them in someone else. I have no idea what you came from today here. I can remember when I was working at St. Patrick's in Victor, there were some ministers of hospitality who, it was kind of these guys thought they owned the place. And if people came late with a flock of kids, you would think they had done a mortal sin. And I said, you have no idea what it was like getting out of the house. With I don't want to go, I won't, I'm fighting, I'm sick to my stomach, I'm not dressed yet. Please. We have no idea what people bring when they come on Sunday morning, what happened to them just before they came into church. To be aware of what's, not to be sneaking and trying to find out what's going on in their life, but just to be aware that we don't know what's going on in someone else's life. What someone just said to them. I had one of my dearest friends was a Presbyterian pastor. And she used to say to me, Barbara, it's so hard. And I bet Rob can speak to this. Just before I'm ready to walk down the aisle with the opening hymn, someone runs up and says, my husband's having an affair. Well, I understand why they do that. But can you imagine trying to get your thoughts together then and go down the aisle and be present to everybody and preach when you've got that in the back of your mind? We have no idea what people are going through. I believe the life, death, resurrection cycle that we have been discussing encourages us to bring resurrection to others with a small r, to bring new life to others. When Matthew Clark and then Salvatore took us out of the pulpit, I'm honest with you, it was a death experience. The kindness of people and the letters of people were sort of a resurrection experience. But I look back on it, and I can see the new life that came from it. To go on and get more education in preaching, and then to have Protestant churches open. There are all kinds of ways in which, and I'm not saying to hurry the grieving process. I'm not saying that at all. But to be aware on some level that new life is possible and that we will find small resurrection moments if you give it time and try to respond to God's grace. Barbara Brown Taylor is an Episcopal priest, tiny little woman, gray hair, considered to be one of the best women preachers in the country. Her books are wonderful. Leaving Church is one. A lot of books on preaching. This one is called Holy Envy. It's an easy read. And in the book, she relates that she was teaching at a junior college a course on world religions. And she had the students go on a Sunday or a Saturday to all of these different services to try to understand them. And some students really resisted, particularly the strict evangelical Christians. But they had to get the credit. And in this book, she says, as she reflects on the class, that when she moved around with them to other groups, to a Sikh service, to a synagogue service, to a Muslim service, to another Christian service, that she saw things in those denominations that were so beautiful, she had a holy envy for them. She didn't leave her Christian faith, it just made her stronger. But what she was experiencing was a resurrection moment, understanding what other men and women believe and how they're trying to answer the questions of life. Holy Envy. It's a great book. So, now what? Yes. Well, yes. Yes, he did. But the thing about Matthew Clark, and I'm not making a judgment about Salvatore, I understand where he's coming from. Matthew Clark, and it was 1980, I was only 3 at the time. They had to get me a little stool to get up at the pulpit. It was really, a little, but anyway, I had been preaching for quite a while because when I left, I had been preaching for quite a while because Matthew, I was at St. Monica's. Matthew became the new bishop in 1979, and we were all wondering, he was a baby bishop. Remember Ruth? Ruth and I were working at the same time together. She was 4, I was 3. And so Matthew issued a note to say, the law says laypersons cannot read the gospel or preach. So our little parish quickly became Presbyterian. We had a survey. And the people said, we like it, we like the preaching. We also had altar girls. But if the bishop says what he says, we'll obey. But we dragged it out as long as we could, until finally Matthew came, and he would not budge. No, boom. So I left. I'm not going to sit there and listen and cry all week. So I left and I went to work in the jail. Talk about resurrection. 13 denominations open to me to preach because I had to raise money. You see, it worked. But Matthew, bless him, listened. It was a passion moment for him because he was facing pushback over this issue. The women of the diocese were mad. So much so that Matthew did a listening tour. Think about that. He went around the diocese and listened and then wrote a letter apologizing for the way he handled things. He didn't change his mind. Eventually the law changed and he changed his mind a bit. We couldn't read the gospel and it had to be a dialogue. You know, priest has to speak first. But to his credit, one day I got a phone call from him. Oh, there was a message. The bishop wants to speak with you. And I thought, it'll be a cold day you know where before I'm going to call. The next week I came home from work and the phone rang. And I happened to lift it up. Sisters of Mercy, may I speak with Barbara Moore? This is Matthew Clark. So what are you going to do here? He said, I'd like to see you. And I said, I don't know where this came from. I said, is it personal or professional? He said both. So I got in my little car, left the jail, and went down to see him at Sacred Heart. I was as nervous, my mother used to say, as a cat on a tin roof trying to hide its load. Have you ever heard that expression? Well, it's a good one, though. So I went in, and he sat down. He said, Barb, would you like anything to drink? And I thought, if only you knew. I said, no, thank you. No. And he said, well, I'd like to send you to a conference on preaching, lay preaching, but I can't do it until I apologize for the way I treated you in St. Monica's. Think about that. From my toes to my head, I said, he asked for forgiveness. I said, I already have, but I haven't forgotten. And I'll keep working on this. But think about what he did. Bringing that resurrection moment because it was so hard. To his credit, that's why he's so beloved, to his credit. He brought resurrection to me and made me see that life it's the Paschal mystery, life, death, resurrection, that happens on a daily basis. You get up in the morning feeling so good, and then you get a call. Oh, dear Lord. And by the end of the day, some new life has come in. That's the so what, I think, of what this coming week is saying to us. And that there's the promise of new life in the midst of it. What do you think? Amen, sister. You've got to have some comments here, personal experiences, whatever. Oh, here's one. Watch out.
I'm reading a book about Ireland this afternoon.
Okay.
And what I found out yesterday was that 50 years ago in Ireland, And so Spy Wednesday, if anyone ever says that to you, you'll know what it is. Did you ever hear of that before?
No, I didn't.
That was very interesting.
So in Ireland, they celebrate on Wednesdays of Holy Week, Spy Wednesday, and it remembers what Judas did.
Yeah, and everybody goes to church. It's just like Holy Thursday or Good Friday.
It's interesting.
Of course, this was 50 years ago. I don't know.
Well, but still, those traditions.
Nobody goes to church now.
But those traditions speak volumes. So, what I'd like to ask you as we come to the end here, if we were to do something like this again, what are some of the things you would really like to discuss? This one was on the life, death, resurrection cycle, Holy Week. The who, what, where, when, and why, and what does it mean today? What are some of the things you've been thinking about that you might like to discuss together? Yes, sir.
The resurrection of Christianity.
Do you mean the early days of it?
Well, for probably the first 300 years, it went along very well. After we became the number one religion in the world, we continually gone downhill and been the sponsors of a lot of things that we now look back and say were terrible.
Yeah.
We need a resurrection of Christianity.
All right, so you're suggesting that we take a look at the impact of making the Christian church the official church, what the impact of that was in the 300s. You,
The impact is where are we today and where do we need to go?
where do we need to go in the future? You know, I think it's all well and good for our nation to talk about racism. But our church has had a spotty history here. And the Inquisition was not the most pleasant event. Burning people at the stake was not so nice. What we did to indigenous people. Did you see that the Jesuits from Georgetown, who had slaves, are now setting up scholarships as a form of reparation? And the new bill that was just passed sets up a form of reparation for black farmers whose land was taken. There is much we need to do to heal the wounds of the past. It's in our families, it's in our church, it's in our nation. And I think the Christian message gives us a way of looking at it. We go through life, death, resurrection cycles.
I think we are a product of all those things.
Indeed, we are. Just as.
It's understandable why we are the way we are.
Indeed. And there's something, I think, to be learned from thinking you have all the answers to all the issues. We do it in politics, we do it in faith, and there's so little we know. But we find that, as Barbara Brown Taylor said, we're at home in this Christian message. It makes sense to us. And the message of Jesus Christ, how to live with one another, makes sense. It's not easy. And we've made some huge mistakes. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Last night, I was appalled to watch a movie about the Jesuits in Japan
Yeah.
A whole section of the world could be without any kind of, I don't know anything about it.
Well, maybe that's a little project for you to get on the internet and look at the history. But what you need to know, I do believe, is that all these people to whom the Jesuits and the sisters and the priests went to spread Christianity had faith systems of their own. They had faith systems of their own, and we did not appreciate those faith systems. There's faith in Japan. There's a series on public television sometimes that talks about the great religions of the world: Buddhism, Confucianism, Hinduism. They're different, but they all have a sense of a power beyond us, and most of them say some kind of eternal life and how to live a good life. But we tended to go in and say our life and our way is the one. The religions? That would be a good, comparing the religions of the world. Well, yeah. Jim. Right? Okay. So we've seen the religions of the world, the gospels that were left out and why, the impact of church and state becoming one. The other interesting topic is, how do we live in a separation of church and state? And when do we cross boundaries? When do we cross boundaries? So there's lots to look at. And God willing, if we do another one of these, I'm happy to look at them with you. Now, it's almost 11. Is there any other question you might want to ask? Yes, my love.
Question, sister, but we had the one week on when we pray, and I have one that's called "I Heard God Laugh" by Michael Kelly, maybe.
Okay.
Somebody Kelly. It's very good. It's a very easy read, but it's very enlightening.
Good.
So for people that don't want to get really in depth, but really want to have a little food for thought, that was a really good book. It's kind of funny. I picked it up just because of the title.
I heard God laugh. Good. Good. Okay, for free. Joan? Pardon me, dear? That's a huge question. How do I discern the truth? All right, that's a good one too. And if anybody wants to know more about Sue's life, we could spend a couple of lectures on that one. Rob. I am bad. Here comes our pastor. Yes, dear.
How do we reform the church as people, as Jesus ourselves? How do we bring the church up to reality?
Well, there's a... Got him, huh? And you'd say, what else have you got? There's one that'll take a while. Okay.
Well, I want to thank everyone for coming these past 4 weeks. It has gone very quickly, at least for myself, and it's been wonderful to have you here present with us on these Saturday mornings. Last week, Jeff, who's doing our streaming for us, mentioned to Barb, I know like the first week, there were like 180-some hits, checking out Barb's presentation on that. I don't know what happened the other weeks. He hasn't told us yet, but that's quite impressive. As Barb is always very impressive in sharing her faith and life with us. So I'd like us all to thank her. A little round of
Thank you.
applause.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I'd also like to share with you, before she does her next series, Barb will be here this Good Friday. We missed last year because of the pandemic, but Barb will be returning, as she has in the past on Good Friday, and will be sharing her pearls of wisdom and preaching for our service. So I hope you might be able to join us on Good Friday. Enjoy this first day of spring, everyone.
Yeah.
And hope to see you in the coming days and through Holy Week if possible.
And
God bless you.
thank you, Bob, for the setup. And who's that dear man? What's his? Jeff for the, yeah. Thank you, everybody. You know, this goes both ways. If I give, I get much more out of it. So be safe. Get your shots, everyone. Stay healthy, and thank you. Thank you.